Bitcoin is that escape. It's as if one of those cows found a breach in the fence and they're freeing themselves. And now everyone realizes that every time a cow pushes through there, that breach is getting a little wider and is getting noticed by more of the herd. And no one's just going to sit in there if there is an escape from that situation. They're not just going to sit there and allow themselves to just continuously be milked. Disciplines. You have to understand economics. You have to understand cryptography. You have to understand geopolitics. You have to understand game theory. You have to understand all these different things. So, which makes it very, very interesting for us to look into all those things. If you're a kind of an intellectually curious-minded person, Satoshi saw the answer. I saw the problem, but Satoshi saw the answer. Kind of codified American values. If you just think of life, liberty, property, like Bitcoin just is those things. It's inherently American, I think. And I'm not to say that freedom only exists in America, but the way we have our founding documents laid out, Bitcoin perfectly aligns with it in a codified, immutable way. I think it's a combination of those things. I think it's that strategic Bitcoin reserve for us, stablecoins for you, buy us a little bit of time.
I did some more research and I saw that you are a private pilot and you were in the military before. I think that was new to me, actually.
I had a brief stint. Yeah, I was, I fly now, so I'm a pilot now, full time. So this is kind of the podcasting is kind of the side hustle, the passion project.
Awesome, really cool. But was the pilot something you did already before Bitcoin, or is this something now that you started doing?
Oh no, yeah, pilot's been my gig for years and years now. That's kind of the breadwinner. That's the sat mining. It's excuse me, flying the airplanes. So flying the airplanes is my full-time gig, and then I just do the podcasting as kind of a side passion project, just because I really believe in Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin, and I want everyone else to see what we see. So that's kind of my way to give back and hopefully onboard all the newcomers that I believe are still to come. So
really interesting. Just for me to understand, what did you like with the private pilot, and also saw that you did something with military. What actually did you do before Bitcoin and outside of Bitcoin? Maybe that's a little bit interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So the way I found Bitcoin maybe in the first place was I had half of the homework kind of already done. So long story going back, I was aviation. I got an older brother that was in the Air Force. I was kind of thinking I might do that. I had a fighter jet job in the Air National Guard, but I got it pulled medically only because, long sob story, but I had a PRK at the time, eye surgery, and developed a little cataract because of the surgery, and then got medically disqualified from the pilot slot in the military. So then I couldn't actually pursue that. That led me, this was kind of in the, early 2000s or 2000s. So, 9/11 had happened and terrorism was the hot button issue and those kind of things. So I decided to go back to graduate school, and I got a master's in international security. And, we kind of were charged with looking at all the different threats, what's kind of the asymmetric threats to the United States. I came to the conclusion back then, our biggest threat was our own fiscal irresponsibility. It wasn't really somebody hiding in a cave in Afghanistan or somebody, some near peer kind of invading America. So I did all my research on national debt dynamics and how that national debt and the growing of that debt and the compounding interest was going to end up putting us in a very unfortunate fiscal position as we moved forward. So I always like to say that Satoshi saw the answer. I saw the problem, but Satoshi saw the answer. So, but for a long time, I'd kind of given up on it. I kind of thought, I just watched that math compound. I think I was doing most of my research when the U.S. national debt was maybe $9 trillion, $10 trillion. And I was like, hey guys, this is going to be a problem. And then I just watched it become a problem over the next decade. It just went from, 10 trillion to now we're sitting at 36.5 trillion. And now it's becoming pretty obvious to everybody that the debt is a problem, and it's actually causing us to it's forcing a response. We just can't allow $2 trillion deficits to pile up. We're at a $2.8 trillion deficit run rate at the U.S. this year. So it was going from $1 trillion to $2 trillion to pushing $3 trillion. And, we only take in $4.5–5 trillion of tax revenue a year anyway. So it was eating the whole budget. I kind of had foreseen this when I was doing graduate work, and I just got to the point that I was like, we're doomed. Like this math, there's no escaping this math. And obviously I didn't see Bitcoin at that time, but I was like, there's no escaping this math. We're going to dirt this thing. So I just kind of became nihilistic about things. And I was like, you know what? I love aviation. I'm just going to go fly. I'm just going to leave this alone because I didn't see any real solution. And then, so I only say that because people are always like, oh, I kind of missed Bitcoin or I didn't notice it. I had done half of the work to understanding Bitcoin. I already knew everything about Austrian economics. I was laser focused on the debt being a problem. So half of the equation, the economic side of the equation, the sound money kind of part of the equation, I had already done. And I also missed Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin just seemed like I'd heard about it. I also dismissed it. I was like, even if that works, I don't understand it. But even if it did work, there's no way the government's going to allow this to happen. That's where I started in that camp. I didn't realize how robust it was against attack or how resilient it would be in the face of adversaries. So I also missed it. And then it was, kind of COVID era where the world slowed down and I took another bite at that apple. I remember my brother calling me out of the blue and asking me about Ethereum, and it was looking into what the hell Ethereum was. I kind of was like, I don't know, man. I think it's like Bitcoin's little brother. I don't think it's that. Like, I'll look into it. And just doing a little bit of digging on Ethereum kind of got me to really understand Bitcoin. And then I was like, God dang it, man! Like this solution's been in front of your face. The thing you were looking for 20 years has been right in front of your face the whole time and you missed it. So I only say that because it's a difficult thing. We know this when we're trying to explain Bitcoin to people. It's a difficult thing to understand because you have to understand so many different disciplines. You have to understand economics. You have to understand cryptography. You have to understand geopolitics. You have to understand game theory. You have to understand all these different things. So, which makes it very, very interesting for us to look into all those things if you're a kind of a intellectually curious minded person. But it's also just a lot to take on for just the common guy that's just, working his 9 to 5, lunch paling it and trying to feed his kids. It's a hard thing to be like, oh yeah. Oh, and by the way, I'll spend all my extra time reading economics books. It's just not really tenable for your average person.
That's super interesting, the background. Maybe a stupid question, but what is international security? So you basically assess the risks that can come to a country?
Yeah, it was essentially like it was like a political science master's, and I had a focus in intelligence. So it was kind of just doing intelligence analysis at that point and trying to figure out what those threats were. So it was obviously at that time, very kind of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency focused. But I just looked at the playing board and I was like, hey guys, none of these are problems for sure. Like, I mean, there's no doubt that terrorism is a problem and could cause problems and causes deaths, and something that needs to be vigilantly looked at and followed. But I just came to the conclusion, big picture, that was like, I'm not really worried about these guys. They're going to cause disruptions, but they don't seem like an existential threat to my country. What seems like an existential threat to my country is how irresponsible we're being with the money and the spending and the money printing, et cetera. So, and I think that's what we're seeing. It's like terrorism is still a problem, but we're not fast forward 20 years. That debt problem has become much bigger. I think you could argue that the terrorism problem has maybe stayed about the same, or even maybe gotten a little bit of smaller since the 2000s. So I think the world is kind of playing that theory out, where I think we're getting to the point now where even the United States government understands that they're in a completely untenable fiscal position and something has to be done at this point.
Yeah, the debt is fast. And then I always look at, because my dad, long before I got him into Bitcoin and I was in Bitcoin, long before, he already talked about how irresponsible governments are doing with money, how big of a debt we have and how bad it is for the next generation. But he always also said, like, but every country is doing it. So
Yeah.
how bad is it? And for me now is like, yeah, if every country is doing the fiat game, maybe there's like not an imbalance between the countries because like everyone plays the same game. But as soon as one country starts to adopt Bitcoin, this country will start to get ahead, and will start to accumulate a lot more wealth over time. And that's basically what we've seen in 2021 with El Salvador. How do you look at the debt problem when kind of the argument is, and I get that actually from some people, but doesn't everyone do the fiat game, like because everyone does it? Is it now good? And how do you look at when all of a sudden countries like El Salvador or Bhutan maybe also America in the future a little bit more aggressive, not just declaring the Bitcoin that they have as a strategic reserve, but actually buying also some. How do you look at that picture?
Yeah, really good question, man. It reminds me of the book, The Sovereign Individual. There's a passage in that book. I'm going to just paraphrase it, but they basically say that governments no longer respect us. They basically treat us like cows in the pasture waiting to be milked. So when everyone is doing this fiat printing game and everyone is a prisoner to that monetary monopoly, you can have a lot of hubris as the money printer or as the authority. You could really kind of abuse those people because like in your eyes there was no escape. So if there's no way to escape the plantation, you can whip the workers as many times a day as you want to. Well, their problem was, and I think what they're coming to realize now is Bitcoin is that escape. It's as if one of those cows found a breach in the fence and they're freeing themselves. And now everyone realizes that every time a cow pushes through there, that breach is getting a little wider and is getting noticed by more of the herd. And no one's just going to sit in there if there is an escape from that situation. They're not just going to sit there and allow themselves to just continuously be milked. So I think it was a situation where no one really believed or was paying enough attention. Maybe El Salvador was just one cow leaving, and then maybe Bhutan is two cows leaving. And then, suddenly you're starting to realize it was like, if everyone's leaving, like there's no way, we can't repair the fence. We can't keep them in here anymore. There is an escape hatch, particularly being Bitcoin, where you can't just go mend to the fence. Like Bitcoin's not something you can just go shut down or stop or, so I think they're starting to understand that. And I think we almost jumped the shark on it where I believe that the world was considering trying to box it in. They were considering trying to see what they could do, hopefully do some international coordination between central banks, between, large nation states, and try to put a cap on this thing, or just be like, hey, okay, we'll allow it to maybe be an asset, but it's definitely not going to be money. They're like playing those kind of games and just seeing what they could get away with. I think now you're seeing the people that are the most well educated about it. I think they're starting to understand and starting to advocate. It was like, you cannot stop this thing. And if you cannot stop it, it becomes kind of like the Saifedean idea of gunpowder. Like if you cannot stop it, you get put in the join or die position. So I think we're getting to the point here that I know even in our first conversation, we talked about how I was hoping Bitcoin would make America, force them to be more American again. And I think in some ways it's exactly what it's doing. I think they realize they cannot stop it. And they're starting to understand the game theory math of this all, where if you cannot stop it, you almost have to be first. So I always wanted America to be first. I thought that Bitcoin was kind of codified American values. If you just think of life, liberty, property, like Bitcoin just is those things. It's inherently American, I think. And I'm not to say that freedom only exists in America, but the way we have our founding documents laid out, Bitcoin perfectly aligns with it in a codified, immutable way. So I always wanted us to go first, thought we should go first, but thought we would not go first because we've enjoyed this exorbitant privilege of having the reserve currency for decades and decades, which allows us to steal from the entire world and make our standard of living better. So no one's just going to give that up kind of voluntarily. But I think the power of Bitcoin is it's kind of signaled that it's here to stay. People are starting to notice that. And if that's going to be the reality, if you don't go first, you're last. It's like if you don't go first, you're bored in Southwest with C-74 on your pass, and you're going to get the shittiest seat on the plane. So I think that's what the U.S. is starting to realize. And I think now that they've signaled from the very top with the whole SPR idea, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve idea, now that they've signaled that, I know people were a little bit disappointed by it because it was like, oh, they didn't come out and just say, we're buying $100 billion of this thing. But I think if you have trust in that game theory, that's coming next. Because once they started the gun and started the race, you have no choice but to race. So I think people will be surprised of the size and just how quickly this comes together. Because I think the people driving that part of the agenda do understand that only one nation is going to be able to carve out a dominant position in this new monetary network, and they want to be that person, and they're going to figure that part out. So I think it's going to happen faster than people think. So if you were disappointed on on game day. Just wait a few months, and I think you'll be surprised at how much progress is made.
Yeah, the idea that Robert Kennedy Jr., I think, brought up with accumulating 20 or 25% of the Bitcoin supply. I think it was 4 million Bitcoin, which he shouted out, which is for me an absurd big amount. And I'm not even sure how fast they could get there and what would happen with Bitcoin if they actually had that goal of accumulating so many.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to see and play out in real time this year, next year, the next 10 years, how the US is now starting from, hey, let's do those 200,000 Bitcoin that we have and name it strategic Bitcoin reserve. How do we go from here to maybe having 500,000 or 1 million Bitcoin? Because they should at least have more than MicroStrategy, I guess.
Yeah.
A US company should not have more than a US itself. I mean, I'm a big believer that citizens and the private companies should have more, but in their eyes, they should. They don't want to be lower than a company. So it will be really fun to see how this all shakes out. How do you actually look at those things, and also Doge and Trump and the Bitcoin strategy and what's going on currently?
Yeah, I mean, very interesting, very big idea. I think what's interesting about strategy is kind of proven at the corporation level that if you're a first mover, you can basically build a lead that is insurmountable. And I think I don't think that signal's been lost at the nation state level of game theory of just like strategy is going to be the one corporation that can get to probably 500,000 Bitcoin. There's really nobody else out there that'll probably be able to catch them at that point. They've already established that dominant position on the corporation level. I think whoever moves first in size, it's not that El Salvador doesn't matter, but they're a small country. Bhutan's a small country. Whichever large kind of G7 power country moves in size first is going to do the same thing strategy did on the corporate level. They're going to make an insurmountable lead at the nation state level. They're going to be the network leader. They're going to have all the leverage. So someone's going to realize that and kind of figure that out. And I hope it's going to be us. Looks like it very well could be us. And I think all the other things happening at the nation state level are kind of indicative of that goal, and that hopefully we're going to be able to move fast enough to establish that dominant position. The way I look at the strategic Bitcoin reserve and Doge and all of these things, I think it's a combination of both of those things. So it's the impossible fiscal position that the United States realizes it's in. We've just over the last few years watched our deficit go from 1 trillion to 2 trillion. Now we're at a burn rate of 2.8 trillion. We realize we can't escape that math now. So I think all the people in the know are like, okay, well, what comes next? If you believe Howard Lutnick, who's our new Commerce Secretary, the whole kind of idea was we're running a $2 trillion deficit. I need Doge and Elon to go find me $1 trillion of cuts. I need to go find $1 trillion of revenue. That brings us down to just a balanced budget at that point. And then we can, start doing tax cuts and other things that they want to accomplish. I think that's very ambitious. I will say I've been somewhat surprised at just how I knew my government was wasteful, but I've been very surprised just how much waste Doge has been able to find in just turning over the first couple couch cushions. You're just like, holy crap. This is a much worse situation than I thought it was. But the good part about that is maybe they're going to be able to find far more government cuts than was necessarily initially anticipated. But it's still an ambitious goal, only because if you break down the numbers of like the United States budget easily, we spend about 7 trillion a year. We bring in roughly 5 trillion a year, but that 5 trillion is completely spent through budget or interest on the national debt. That's about $1 trillion a year. Military in the United States is just under $1 trillion a year. Medicare and Social Security are just about 1.5 trillion apiece. So there's your 5 trillion right there. That's all the money you take in, just those 4 things, those 4 programs. So if you want to try to balance the budget, at least conceptually, if you can't find a ton of waste inside those other budget items that bring that number down, you have to get rid of the entire government. And even if you got rid of the entire government, every single agency, every single employee, every single thing, every single building, you still are basically running a deficit at that point. So I just don't think everyone realizes the gravity of just how bad that fiscal position has gotten. So I think these guys are taking some pretty gross input, egregious moves right out of the gates, and it's making people here a lot of nervous. Like they're cutting entire agencies, they're laying off thousands of people. they're putting tariffs on the whole world, and it all seems like, oh, whoa, like this is too much. It's too much too fast. And I think in some ways they're kind of following the Javier Milei model in Argentina, where you just kind of come in and just afuera, just start ripping band-aids off and just reset and just kind of rebuild in the way you want to rebuild. But I just don't think that it seems like too much. If I was gonna, as a pilot, if I was gonna make an airplane analogy here, when you're flying an airplane, you never want to make gross control inputs, because you can put the aircraft in an unstable position. You can stall it out. You can, go over its maneuvering speed, do structural damage to an aircraft. That being said, if you're flying towards a mountain and your only choice is to make gross control inputs or hit that mountain, then all deals are off. Then you're willing to stress the airframe a little bit. You're willing to kind of like put a gross control input just to stay alive. So it's kind of interesting where people say like, people find Bitcoin when they need Bitcoin. And it's not really the privileged people that find it first. It's usually someone that has a real need to find it. I think you can argue now that we're starting to recognize that the United States, although it is the world's superpower and it's had the reserve currency, they're starting to run that budget debt math, and they're starting to realize that it's like, for them, Bitcoin is not a nice to have. Bitcoin is a need to have. So you bring up like RFK and this very ambitious goal of basically trying to match our gold reserves with Bitcoin. So we have like whatever 5% of the world's gold. Let's have 5% of the world's Bitcoin. I think when I think of RFK, I think of his uncle, late President JFK, that was assassinated. He used to say, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think if we think about that in Bitcoin terms, that's where we're at with Bitcoin. It's not what my country can do for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to be fine. I could give a crap if my country actually gets a Bitcoin reserve or starts buying it, but my country needs a Bitcoin. So it's what can Bitcoin do for my country? Because I think it's the only way that I see, and I think it's the only proposal that's been put out there that actually gives us a path to crawl out of this hole that we've built. So, there's Cynthia Loomis and Michael Saylor. They've been doing this kind of math of, if we're able to buy Bitcoin now and we actually, are able to pass this through Congress and get an actual Bitcoin reserve that we start to fund over the next 5 years, you can actually see, and then there's a 20-year lockup where we lock up that Bitcoin, we allow it to accrue value density, and then hopefully use that only to pay off the debt in 20 years. So where we pulled the whole future forward and spent all of our kids' future right out from under their legs, now this allows us to lock up, get that first mover advantage. Just like everybody in Bitcoin knows, if you're in early, everyone that comes later floats you. So I think that's what they're going to try to do at the nation state level. And it's really the only way you can get out of an impossible fiscal position, because we're not going to be able to grow our way out of it. We're not going to be able to do all these things because with the Jeff Booth idea of productivity, and we know that AI is coming and robotics are coming, and it's going to be this very deflationary economy that's in a vacuum going to accrue a lot of purchasing power to the dollar because it's going to become so much more efficient. But when you're that debt laden, you can't afford any purchasing power to accrue to your currency, because the whole thing was kind of built on this way that no one can escape, and we're going to be able to Ponzi this thing down. So you can't allow for purchasing power because you're already in an insolvent fiscal position, and every ounce of purchasing power that goes into your currency now makes all of your debt harder to pay in real terms. So they haven't been able to allow that. They're not going to allow that. And they're going to start pulling on both sides of this rubber band where technology is going to try to force prices to the floor. And since you can't allow that to happen, you have to just continue to print. So I think they saw this dynamic where we're really in trouble here. Like, this technology is going to accelerate efficiency, but as a government being insolvent, we're going to have to print and steal all that productivity for ourselves. And the government's just going to continue to grow until it just snuffs out everything, until it just strangles the goose. So I think the people, and if you, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he, before the election, he had an interview where he was basically saying, within the next 4 or 5 years, the United States is going to need some kind of monetary reset, some kind of Bretton Woods 2.0. So he kind of saw it, and now they handed him the reins to Treasury. He's kind of running that money game from the inside. So I think he understands that. I think they all kind of get it. And it's this idea of we cannot keep doing what we're doing. If we do that, we're going to fly this plane straight into the mountain. We have to do something, and we have to do something of size. We're kind of past the point where small tweaks will actually fix this problem. So I don't know. I'm not on the inside. I'm not working on this administration or anything like that. But I think their ultimate goal is to go back to a world where tariffs were the revenue stream and that income tax was a very small part of the equation. So back in the late 19th century in America, called like the Gilded Age here, like 1870 to 1900, or even Trump himself, which is also probably kind of a little breadcrumb. He constantly is saying that the most prosperous time in America was from 1870 to 1913. He always uses 1913 as like the ending point, which is only interesting because that's the year that we got an income tax, and that's the year that the Fed was created. So for the whole kind of Gilded Age in America, we ran off tariff revenue. And this isn't like an endorsement of like, hey, this current administration, what they're doing. It's just, this is what I think is their frame of mind is, I want to go back to that place. That was one of the most prosperous economic times in American history. And we didn't have an income tax, and we ran everything off of tariffs. So I think what changed that regime was, and the thing that 1913 wasn't necessarily a coincidence, the whole world's kind of a industrial base got smoked during World War I. So once once Europe is devastated by World War I, it's hard to run things off of tariffs because all the people that were paying the tariffs and making the goods that you were tariffing in the first place, they all just got completely decimated by war. So the idea was, we'll move away from this tariff model because it doesn't make sense of the current geopolitical climate. We'll allow Europe to rebuild, and then we'll, in the meantime, we'll put this income tax in place. That'll become the revenue stream temporarily, or whatever it would be. And it was only supposed to be a small tax on the very top earners, the top 1% to 3% of income earners in the US. Fast forward now, 100 years, they never revisited that. They never went back to tariffs. They left the income tax in place, and it grew to the point where, you ever hear like Tax Freedom Day? It's this idea of like, this is the day that you stop working for the government and actually work for yourself. And it's somewhere like mid-April. I think it's like April 9th or something like that. So every single thing you do between January 1st and April 9th is just paying for your government. Like you're not enjoying any of that productivity yourself. So it's like more than a quarter of the whole year you're just working for the government and not yourself. So I think the idea is the math is broken, the system's broken. Here's our opportunity. We're just going to flip the board over, let all the pieces fall, and then rebuild as we may. So I think there's a much larger plan at play here where they're willing to forego a little short-term pain with the idea that it was like, hey, we're not finessing the edges here. This thing is doomed. We have to reset the math. And whether that ends up resetting to a Bitcoin standard with that Bitcoin reserve kind of at the base layer of that, I imagine it probably is some combination of that, Bitcoin reserve on one side, and then basically forcing stable coins on the entire world as a way to have a new kind of forced treasury buyer. Because I don't know if you noticed, Tether became the 6th largest buyer of US treasuries last year. So I think at a time where we've taken all these geopolitical steps to, confiscate Russia's treasuries, and now all of our adversaries are kind of don't really want treasuries anymore because they're no longer neutral. We kind of reneged on that idea that they're neutral. It was like, well, they're, it's a perfect safe reserve asset as long as you do what we say. If you don't, then we'll just take it from you. So everybody got that signal. So there's not as many foreign buyers of our treasuries. Everyone in America, with the fact that, I know they kind of forced the CPI down. They first, like the consumer price index, they manipulate that number down. But everyone's starting to realize that if I'm holding a treasury at 4%, I'm getting negative real yield. I'm holding a negative real yielding asset because the actual true money printing is probably 8-10%, something like that. I mean, the M2 money supply expansion is about 8%. So they realize they're bleeding out. So then it's just a matter of like, no one really wants the treasuries, but the one treasury demand that is growing is this stable coin. So if we can kind of force stable coins on the whole world, because they want dollars anyway. Usually when you travel, people want to get their hands on dollars. And now that we can give them access through tech, it's like, fine, give them dollars. And then we'll just force the stablecoin issuers to become the treasury buyers that we lost doing all the other things. So I think it's a combination of those things. I think it's that strategic Bitcoin reserve for us, stable coins for you, buy us a little bit of time, try to reset to some kind of new standard. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think the large chess game going on is much larger than, people realize when they just look at the stock market dropping 1,000 points and it was like, what the hell's going on? These guys are idiots. It's like they think that's where it ends. I think there's a lot more going on in the background.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. That was an amazing explanation. I never heard it in that way. It also is an interesting way. I mean, tariffs is something very interesting that I hear it now in Austria and Europe mainstream media, like, oh, tariff war, Trump is so bad, and it's like you hear that every day. It's fascinating how mainstream media is obsessed with Trump. They cannot not mention him. This was completely different with Biden. When Biden was in office, I didn't hear a whole lot about American news and Biden. Yeah. Now that Trump is there, you have USA almost every single day in the news cycle since basically he was elected. Interesting is also how a Bitcoin world would change taxation. How do you look at that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, yeah, the first part, the tariff part, I kind of understand why they're maybe hitting the sky a little bit because, these tariffs are pretty legitimate out of the gates. I would say the one thing is, usually people worry about Frederic Bastiat. He's a great French economist. He had a great quote where if goods don't cross borders, then soldiers will. So I completely sympathize with the idea of anytime people see tariffs, it makes them very nervous because usually it was imagine all the nations start from zero and then they start to do these kind of tit for tat tariffs. They kind of ratchet up the pressure on each other. It only makes life more expensive for everybody, and then eventually turns into some kind of kinetic war. I think what's maybe interesting here is, in some ways, the way we're doing this is that math is somewhat reversed because they're just saying, hey, these are just reciprocal. And yeah, I think you can argue about their methodology and how they came up with a kind of a tariff for what nation, because some of them they put in value added taxes, and it was some kind of combination of like, well, here's our trade deficit with this country and here's the amount of goods we take, so the tariff must be 60% or something like that. We'll give them half of that. So you can poke at the methodology, but the way they're structuring it is, these are just reciprocal. So, hey, if you want to take your tariff down to 0 tomorrow, we'll meet you at 0. So it's you kind of flip the incentive structure over where countries are kind of incentivized to bring those tariffs down as opposed to ratchet them up. So it's going to be interesting to see if that actually takes and if that incentive structure actually works. But theoretically, you could end up just removing all tariffs. And I even saw Scott Besson talk about that, the idea of, he equated it to like nuclear war, but an idea of escalate to de-escalate, where you take this escalated position, but then put the incentive structure in place to actually cut down. It's like escalate, but then everyone's going to start cutting their missiles down. So hopefully this leads us to a much freer trade world than we started with, so we'll see kind of how the tariffs work in that regard. As far as like taxation goes with Bitcoin, that's kind of interesting too. I don't know if this is part of their calculus. I think they're maybe just looking at this golden age of America and wanting to return to that place. And they don't really like the idea that they're beholden to the Federal Reserve and how they're manipulating the interest cost of money, and that the executive branch has no say in that. I think that rubs them the wrong way. So they're like, hey, you know what? We're just going to make them obsolete. I think it's kind of the idea. So, but it is interesting because as Bitcoiners, we know that the beautiful thing about Bitcoin, and the reason we save in it in the first place, is we know it can't be confiscated and we know it cannot be debased. So if suddenly that becomes the money that all of your people are running to save their value, you're going to have to reevaluate how are you going to go about taxing these people, because you've built your empire on confiscating their wealth and debasing their wealth away. So if those things are no longer possible, the math changes. So at that point, what do you do? So and I don't think that that's at the base level of this pivot from income tax to tariffs. I don't really think they're seeing it the way we see it. They don't see the base level of Bitcoin as kind of being, if you change the base level of money, you change all the structures built on top of that money. I don't think they're quite there yet. I think they're stuck in the middle. Like, I think the idea of even this tariff regime is, it's basically Triffin's dilemma, right? We had the reserve currency of the world. It makes your currency relatively stronger than all other currencies. Everybody needs your currency. So you end up importing everything. Industrial base creates everything for your economy. You export only debt. You let that run for a little while. You look down and suddenly your own industrial base, your own manufacturing base is completely gone. And that's what's happened to the United States. And I think they see that the manufacturing base is gone. They realize that that's not good for the overall health of a country. They realize that's not good for the overall health of an economy, and therefore the military that's built on that economy. So they want to reshore things. They want to rebuild things here in America. But they're looking at Triffin's dilemma, and they're treating the symptom. They don't realize that the money caused that problem. And I think this is true on both sides. And I have this kind of grand desire or hope, probably more hope, so they're treating that symptom of Triffin's dilemma with tariffs. And then on the left side of the political spectrum here, they hate wealth inequality. They think it's completely unfair. They're misinterpreting how that unfairness happened. They don't understand that the money printing causes wealth inequality. It mathematically redistributes money from the bottom to the top and concentrates it over time. So they're also just trying, but they want to tax the rich. They want to tax the rich. They want to redistribute the money. And so instead of turning the washing machine that's taking everyone's money and giving it to the top in the first place, they just want to take it from the top and give it back to the bottom. So they're treating a symptom of money as well. So everyone's treating a symptom, and nobody's realizing that the disease is that money core. And I have this this hope maybe that Bitcoin will expose this, and then there could be this superordinate goal that actually brings these tribes together. And if you're sitting in America, that's going to sound nuts. The idea that anyone on the right and anyone on the left is suddenly going to high five, kumbaya, and like get along right now seems impossible. But there are studies of kind of the idea of like tribalism and then a superordinate goal that brings tribes together. And I think you could argue that perhaps fixing the money, since it addresses both concerns of both sides of the political aisle, maybe that could be the superordinate goal that actually brings people together. It was like, hey guys, I realize you're pissed. I realize everyone's pissed. I'm pissed, but we're going about this the wrong way. It's not about wielding the weapon and stealing from the people and doing the things you want to do with the stolen money. It's about actually realizing that the money's busted below that layer, and that if we fix that, all of our concerns get addressed. So, long answer to that. I don't know if that answers the taxation question, but I think the beauty of like what Bitcoin's doing is it's rewiring the economic relationship where, just like people are starting to figure out how to get off the plantation, now that they cannot just steal your money against your will, they're going to have to be accountable to the people. And as soon as we're a ways away from that, it's not like every single person has Bitcoin and is using it and wielding its political power, but you do see it entering the arena. And I do think if we understand the game theory of it, it's going to grow in influence, and they're going to have no choice but to reevaluate that relationship.
That's super interesting. And it also made me think about how Bitcoin actually could change the financial system, because our financial system is basically now debt-based. And what if that's no longer true? Do we have something like credit systems? Do we have things where wealth still concentrates at the top because we might have a different asset, but there's still a credit system where someone that has a lot of Bitcoin gets a better credit score than someone else? Because even in a Bitcoin world, there could be something like a government token or like some kind of credit system. I don't know. How do you look actually at that? Where, like, I guess my question is how Bitcoin will change our financial system. It's an impossible question to ask, but yeah. Do you have some framework to think about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's a big question. I think it's hard. I think particularly when you kind of think of lending and things like that, they're like, well, how are people going to borrow money? Where's it going to come from? As if like the only way you can have money to lend is if you create it out of nothing and steal from everybody. Like as if that's the only answer of the like, okay, well, how could anyone ever lend money unless we just create money? And it was like, well, this is how we got into this problem in the first place. The fact that that's like the first place everybody goes in their thinking. I happen to believe that all consumers are producers. So if I'm creating, if I'm baking pies over here and then I need to go make shoes, I'm a pie producer and I'm a shoe consumer, but those things negate each other because this guy's making shoes and he's buying pies. So every producer is a consumer, every consumer is a producer. You take that into the money world, I think every saver is a lender and every borrower is a consumer too. So like it basically means that everyone's saving money becomes the supply of money that's available to be lent out for other things. And then they get some kind of yield for that, for actually the opportunity cost of giving up that money for a certain duration of time. So it just becomes, and what happens is this happens at a far lower, far more efficient price level than at current, because you can't just create, oh, you want to loan for $1 million here, hang on, let me do some strokes on my keyboard, here's $1 million here, just take it, go do something with it. And that, you kind of have the base level M2 getting built out by the Federal Reserve, and then you got the broad level M2 getting built out by the banking system. So they're all just creating money out of thin air. And it's like, oh, well, if we can't create it out of thin air, where the hell is this going to come from? And the answer to that is the reason you don't, like, you get 0.01% on your savings account is because the bank doesn't give a shit about your savings account. It doesn't need that money to actually make loans. So it doesn't care. It's like, well, that's great. Yeah, you can put your money here and it's going to like help our leverage ratio, but we're just going to create the money to lend anyway. But imagine you need a world where you actually need people to save, and that's the money you have to actually be available to lend. And then you have to give them a real market interest rate for that time cost of money that they're going to lock it up and allow you to lend it. You're going to actually have to compensate them. You're not going to be able to give them 0.01% on that money. So it's just going to, it's going to find a market rate for what the cost of money is. And that's why the Fed is so annoying in the first place and how I get frustrated as an economist or an economic minded person in America, where everyone's like, oh, this is what late stage capitalism looks like. And they just get, oh, here we go. Everyone gets rich, everyone else is poor. And I was like, I don't know what kind of definition of capitalism y'all are using, but I think you could argue that if you want to call us free market capitalism, the bare minimum you could ask for is that the cost of money is a free market capital rate, where if you're manipulating the cost of money, that's worse than manipulating the cost of a good. Because, if I manipulate the cost of milk, it's only affecting milk. If I manipulate the cost of gasoline, only affecting gasoline. If I manipulate the cost of money, I manipulate every price and every economic relationship in the universe. So I cause misallocation of capital across the deck, every single industry, every single good, every single service. So if we can get rid of manipulation of money, then you're going to find true free market prices for things, including borrowing, including lending. And then you can live in that world where the money reflects the economic reality. So just like I said, that you're pulling on that rubber band in both directions, because you have money that needs to be printed, but then you have technology that's forcing prices down as fast as it can. Now you have money that aligns with that reality, just like Jeff Booth taught us in The Price of Tomorrow. And you can actually bring all those costs down. They all come down over time. It's going to be a complete rewiring paradigm, because you're going to have to get used to the idea that you don't have to just accumulate more money to get richer. Like, you could actually have the same amount of money, and if it's accruing value density and purchasing power, you're becoming more wealthy even if you don't earn another set. So it's rewiring the relationship, because it's the same reason why people say, like, oh, well, I don't want Bitcoin. Bitcoin has no yield. Like, the kind of idea of yield is us stuck in that old economic mindset of, they don't necessarily, we've never really tied yield directly to inflation. People that work in the industry does, or people that work in finance do, but your average people don't. They're like, oh, I'm making 5% on my money. They think they're making money. They don't think they're just getting compensated for inflation. But the idea of earning yield is just the idea that there's a hurdle rate of inflation that I have to keep up with. Phenomenal parlor trick, because everybody sees their portfolio go up in nominal numbers, and they think they're genius. They see their house go up in nominal numbers. They think I'm a genius. It's like, there's Warren Buffett's all over the place that are just killing this game. It's like somehow everybody that's invested their money since 1990, they're all economic whiz kids. They're all the best traders in the universe, because that nominal float just kept going up over decades and decades. And nobody took the time to be like, you know what? Everybody in the neighborhood can't be a financial genius. Like, how is everything going up all the time for everyone? It's like, so I think we're suddenly going to realize that it just changes the thing, because the hurdle rate is this old idea that you have to beat inflation, but we're not even recognizing the inflation. So it's as if, like, but I think there's going to be a time where, if you can't create money out of nothing, and you really have to match savers with people that want to borrow money, I think you still have lending, you still have borrowing, but the incentive structure makes it far more efficient, because there's a true cost to giving up your money over a period of time to somebody, because they're not just creating it out of thin air. So there's real opportunity cost, but if you're a saver, you'll get compensated for that appropriately. Where all those rates fall out, I'm not sure, but it's not this idea that all lending stops or all spending stops. I just think from a personal level to a institutional level to a kind of borrower corporate level, everything gets more efficient, because you're only going to be willing to take out a loan knowing that, like, say make the numbers easy. If I take out $100 loan right now, that's a no-brainer, because I know I'm going to pay that back with dollars that are worth far less than the $100 that I borrowed. So you're like, oh yeah, I'll just borrow it today, no problem. But if I was borrowing $100 worth of Bitcoin, and I knew that this is going to be harder to pay, by the time I pay this $100 back, it's going to be worth more than when I borrowed it. So now you have a real economic calculation to make, where you don't just throw money everywhere. You don't have a guy that owns a car wash buying 7 properties knowing they're all going to go up in value and that he's just going to pay it off with bullshit dollars in the future. Like now you get very efficient where you're only willing to borrow if you really have an idea that will outpace the density accrual of Bitcoin, which for the short term, that's going to be really, really difficult to do because the thing's CAGRing at 50% a year. Eventually, that should slow down once we get far closer to full adoption, that there will be that economic calculation again. But so the way I think about it is it does change all the math and wiring of these economic relationships. But it doesn't stop them. It just makes them far more efficient. Like I think of there's an attack sometimes on Bitcoin of like, oh, well, if the money, like, how is no one's going to spend any money? They'll just save all of their money. It was like, if it's accruing value, why would they spend anything? And I was like, well, that's not true now. I mean, now I know my money is getting burnt, but I don't spend every single dime I have. Like, but it's the same logic in reverse, right? If that's true, and that if the money is good, that people will never spend it, then when the money's bad, they should spend it all. So the fact that you have savers now basically refutes that argument. It's just going to be, it'll from taking you like an indiscriminate buyer, you'll be an efficient saver and you will spend money, but you'll just be far more deliberate and conscious of the opportunity cost of that money, which forces every economic actor to allocate capital to the max efficiency possible.
I'm 100% Bitcoin and I do spend it because my income is already mostly in Bitcoin. So I am forced to spend it. Otherwise, I don't know what else I would do because my income is in Bitcoin. So maybe I'm one small example of how people live on 100% Bitcoin standard. They understand the Bitcoin value and still spend it because they want to live. Because they want to also have something today. I don't know, maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but dying with the biggest possible Bitcoin stack is not something I'm looking forward to. I want to spend and use my Bitcoin in my lifetime, maybe leave some for my kids, maybe leave some generational wealth, maybe give some to charity. But I'm working hard to earn Bitcoin so I can also use my Bitcoin that I earned. So the idea that people stop spending is so absurd that I'm still boggled that people still bring it up, and people actually do that. So it's a good thing that we mention it, but people actually have that argument like, oh, but when money is going up, then everyone will stop spending. No, people will focus on the things that they actually value and that they actually need, and don't spend on all the BS that they don't need because they're incentivized to focus on the good things. And also one thing that I really liked what you said was the investor thing, because now everyone is forced to be investing, and that's why we lost investor as a job, because finding out which company is really exciting in the future is a cool job. Like, let's dig into all the different companies, figure out which one has a really good market in the future, and where can I put my money. Now that everyone is forced to be an investor because we have broken money, that job kind of is lost in the crowd, and now everyone is like, oh, I'm doing 5% a year, I'm doing 50% a year, I'm doing this percent a year. Yeah, you're a genius investor. You don't realize that your money is lost forever. I like that. I like that a lot. How you put it.
Yeah, well, I mean, also that's another price signal thing. When you talk about the price signal distortion, investing is another part of that. Another branch of that tree, right? If we're just investing because our money's broken and we have to, like, no one's really taking the time to invest in things that they actually believe in. Nobody's really digging into P&Ls and balance sheets and finding companies that they really think that they want to see succeed and they want to get behind and they actually believe in. They're just betting on all the companies because their money's busted and they have to. So that's also very inefficient, because when everyone's just betting on every company in the S&P 500, even though 7 of them are making money and the far majority of them are not, but nobody even knows what they are. It's as if you like walked into like a casino right before March Madness and people are like, well, who do you want to bet on? You're like, I don't know. I'll just give me all of them. I'm just going to bet on all 64 teams. Like, I just like, have you ever even watched basketball before? It's like, no, I don't know shit, but give me all the teams. I'm just put my money on everybody. And you're like, well, that's a pretty inefficient way to allocate capital. It's just to bet on everyone, no matter how good they are, what their odds of winning are, what it is. And that's what we're doing in the investment world. We're just like, my money's burning, get it out of my pockets. I'm just going to invest in everything. So what signal is that sending to the market? We're not sending any economic signal as to which companies are actually being run well, which ones actually have a vision for the future, which ones do we actually believe align with our values. We're just throwing money in there. And it's like, so there is no signal in investing now. It's just become this passive, just throw money. Everybody throws money. Nobody even knows what they hold. Nobody cares what the companies are doing. They're just, they don't necessarily realize it's because their money's broken. But the only reason they do that is because they're just, I need something else. Give me something else. Give me every team, give me St. John's, give me every little guy that made this tournament. It doesn't make any sense from a capital allocation standpoint. And I think that we don't realize how much friction that causes when we're not able to allocate capital appropriately across the board. You end up misallocating it all over the place. And then when they talk about these boom bust cycles and all this misallocation of capital, we're causing it. It's like a free market is a very efficient allocator of capital. And we don't have a free market, but we keep calling it a free market, which has led everyone to believe that free markets are bad allocators of capital. We don't have one. We're manipulating the price of capital. That's distorting all the prices. So the fact that, the economic universe doesn't make a lot of sense, it can't make sense because you took the math away and you flipped it. And now nothing makes sense if you're messing with the actual medium of exchange that all these economic relationships are built on.
Yeah, I went into this trap myself. I was a stock pro before Bitcoin, and I thought I'm doing really good. I had a YouTube channel and talked about it. And then because I actually did well, more and more people kept asking, "Oh, what do you think about that Bitcoin?" And that's how basically I got into Bitcoin. And then I was like realizing, I did not good because I'm a good investor. I just bought some popular stocks and they went all up because of crazy money printing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's super interesting. One topic before we come to the end, what you really want to get into with you is your definition of freedom and how Bitcoin maybe changed your understanding of what freedom actually is.
That's a big question. I think the definition of freedom, I think, is the ability to do anything you want, whenever you want, as long as you don't infringe on the freedom of somebody else. So, people could be like, "Oh yeah, you just go stab a guy in the subway?" You're like, "Well, no, because that is taking freedom away from that guy." So it's the ability to be completely in charge of your own sovereignty, completely in charge of your own energy and existence within the boundary of you don't actually bump up against anybody else's right to do the exact same thing. So I think Bitcoin is perfect for that because Bitcoin is really just, it's your energy that you're storing. So when I go to work and I spend my day doing something I don't want to do, like against my will, but I get compensated for that lost opportunity of like, I want to just go, crack a beer by the river, but instead I go to work and I get compensated for giving that time over, and they give me, this money in return. That's for me to save and be like, hey, that's cracked beers in the future. I can do that whenever I want. I'm saving it up for the future time. I'll do that some other time. But what Bitcoin is doing is it's kind of aligning the idea of personal body autonomy, sovereignty, and freedom, and it's adding all of that energy to that same vessel. So the way I think about Bitcoin is you can become your money. So what makes it truly unconfiscatable is in a meta way, I can become my money where, since it's just held in a mathematical vault that's intangible and nobody can go physically break into that place and take it, the only way I have the only key to it, and the only key I have is in my head. It's an intellectually held key. You become your money. So not only are you are a manifestation of your current energy state, where right now I'm in charge of my body and whatever, but not until now was I able to be in charge of all of the energy I'll put forward prior to today. So now I can store all of that energy in my own body vessel too, where you cannot take me out of the equation and gain access to all of that energy I've already given over. So it makes you a completely sovereign economic individual as well. So it takes the idea of body autonomy and it takes the idea of economic autonomy, and it just merges them together where, just like you said, I don't want to die with my Bitcoin. I want to use it, but I could die with my Bitcoin. Or if someone chooses to take me out of the equation, before they would, you can show up and you can smoke a guy and you can get his house and his wife and his kids and his truck and all his stuff. Now you can store your economic energy in a place where if you take me out of the equation, you get nothing. So it disincentivizes violence. It brings it way down. It allows you to be completely sovereign. It allows all of the economic energy you've been given to be put into a completely sovereign, free place. And then, just like talking about before, when you can do that for yourself, the biggest confiscator of wealth is usually not, just some stick up man on the subway. It's usually the government. And it's usually the fact that they're going to print your kids' life savings away before they even, get to third grade. Suddenly that's no longer a possibility either. So it just makes you as free as you can possibly be. And then I think because, at least for now, since we live under these kind of democratic republic structures, at least in the West, if those people are ultimately free, then it makes the institutions more accountable. And then by design, it makes them more free as well, because they cannot do anything without your permission. So I think it allows, we started free and we drifted way away from being free. But if you re-empower the individual sovereignty of people, I think you rewire the, sovereign structure as well.
I love that, and I hope Bitcoin does it for the world, at least for many individuals. Really cool. I have a new question that I didn't ask you last time, that I ask now every guest of mine, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
That is a good question, because like a lot of Bitcoin nerds out there, it takes a lot of my intellectual energy. It's podcasts all day, it's books all night, it's YouTube. I would say since it's tied into it and all my studies were kind of Bitcoin related when it came to debt and those kind of things, I would say I have a good grasp of that kind of economics. But I've also just been intellectually curious by nature my entire life. And I think that's probably a common thread that Bitcoiners share, is usually they find Bitcoin because they're curious about the world around them. So not like self-aggrandizing, but I'm kind of a jack of all trades. Like I can teach people how to fly planes. I can teach people how to scuba dive. I can teach people how to shoot guns. I can teach people, I'm a EMT. I can teach you how to put a tourniquet on a bleeding arm. So I've kind of just treated life like a bit of an adventure club. So I have a lot of just weird, I'm one of those jack of all trades, master of none kind of people.
And I'm really looking forward to this next one. We have end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And I don't know how he came up with that question. The question from previous guest is, if aliens landed on Earth tomorrow and they asked you to explain Bitcoin using only food analogies, what's your answer?
Dude, that's interesting. I don't know why it would be a food analogy. I think the beauty of that is, if aliens landed here, I think they're probably of a order of magnitude more intelligent than we are. So I don't know if they would need me to explain Bitcoin to them. Hopefully the only reason they got interstellar technology was that they had some form of sound cryptographic money themselves that allowed them to progress society to that level of capabilities. I don't know what the food analogy would necessarily be, unless there's just this idea that, Bitcoin is a meatball sub that I already ate. And, there's no way to separate me from that meatball sub with violence in any way that you would actually want that meatball sub anymore. So if it's just a mangled mess in my stomach, yeah, you could try to cut it out of me. But I don't know, maybe these aliens are freaks. Maybe they like eating that kind of meatball sludge, but it's not like the damage is already done. I've already merged with that food, and you cannot take that food without taking me out of the equation as well. I think maybe that would be the best food analogy I could come up with. But I also think I'm a believer of the Stephen Hawking idea that if there are aliens out there, we better hope they don't find us, because usually when people just come up on indigenous people, it doesn't really go well. There's not really a example of two species merging in history where one doesn't just end up dominating the other and making them subjugate to their whims. So I don't think that would be a friendly interaction, I guess is the point, if they do find us here.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think, because if they find us before we find them, they probably are more advanced than us. And if they're more advanced than us, why shouldn't they dominate us? Like, what incentive do they have to just let us be what we are? I mean, we do that with animals, right?
Right.
I mean,
or the West, right? We landed in the West and we met the Indians, and we're like, "Oh, you guys are pretty cool. How about we take everything from you?" You know, like.
I mean, there's this example of dogs when aliens come to Earth and see the relationships between humans and dogs. They see one species is pooping wherever they want, and the other species is going down on their knees, getting it up and carrying it for the other one. You're not sure which one is dominating.
It's an old Seinfeld bit. Yeah, I like the one where you're like, if you feed a dog, he thinks you're a king, but if you feed a cat, they think they're a king. You know, it's like, it's got that same kind of dynamic.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, for being on the show. Before I let you go, where can people find you and your show?
Yeah, man, happy to do it. I'm the host of the Taking Care of Bitcoin podcast. It's a Bitcoin podcast that is focused on the Bitcoin newcomer. I let them come on and ask their new people questions, and hopefully be that kind of first rung on that ladder to get people curious about Bitcoin and digging a little bit. So it's available anywhere. It's, you know, Apple, Spotify, Fountain, all the kind of normal, wherever you go to get your podcast, it's probably there. And then I'm on X or Twitter at TCB Coin. So if anybody wants to reach out, or if anybody's interested in being a guest on the show or know somebody that might be interested, please hit me up there.
Really cool. Thank you so much for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
See you, buddy.